In this section of the course, we're going to be covering hardening. Now, hardening refers to the process of enhancing the security of a system, application, or network by implementing a series of measures and configurations that reduces its exposure to vulnerabilities and potential threats. Now, these measures typically are going to include applying security patches, configuring access controls, disabling unnecessary services, and adopting best practices to strengthen the overall security posture and resilience against cyber attacks. Now, in this section of the course, we're going to focus on Domain 2 and Domain 4, and we'll be covering Objectives 2.5, 4.1, and 4.5. Objective 2.5 states that you must be able to explain the purpose of mitigation techniques used to secure the enterprise. Objective 4.1 states that given a scenario, you must be able to apply common security techniques to computing resources. And Objective 4.5 states that given a scenario, you must be able to modify enterprise capabilities to enhance security. Now, first, we're going to cover default configurations and how to change them. These default configurations apply to the default password, default open ports and protocols, and other insecure default configurations that may exist in your system. Next, we're going to cover how to restrict applications. Application restriction is a security approach where only explicitly approved or allowed listed applications are going to be allowed to be run on a system or network, while all other applications are going to be blocked by default. This proactive measure is going to ensure that only trusted and authorized software can be executed while minimizing the risk of malware or unauthorized programs that can compromise your system security. Then, we'll take a look at unnecessary services on your system and how we can disable them. Unnecessary services refer to software processes or network services running on a computer or network that are not required for essential system functionality or business operations. These services may consume system resources, introduce security vulnerabilities, and increase the attack surface, which makes your system more susceptible to a cyber attack. After that, we'll cover trusted operating systems. Now, trusted operating systems are specialized operating systems that have undergone rigorous security evaluations and certifications to ensure their trustworthiness and reliability for handling sensitive or classified information. These operating systems are designed with strict security controls and access restrictions to protect against unauthorized access, data breaches, and other security threats. Next, we'll explore updates and patches. Updates are software modifications or improvements released by developers to enhance the features, fix bugs, or improve security, stability, and performance of their software. Patches, on the other hand, are specific software updates that are designed to address identified vulnerabilities or security issues inside of a program, system, or application. Then, we'll discuss patch management. Now, patch management is the systematic process of identifying, testing, deploying, and monitoring software patches and updates to maintain the security and functionality of a computer system. After that, we'll explore group policies. Group policies are a set of rules and configurations in Windows environments that allow administrators to centrally manage and control user and computer settings, ensuring compliance and security with your operational standards. Next, we're going to cover SE Linux. Now, SE Linux, or Security Enhanced Linux, is a security framework for Linux-based operating systems that implements mandatory access controls to confine and limit the actions of processes and users to enhance the system's overall security. Then, we'll take a look at data encryption levels. Data encryption is the process of converting data into a secret code to prevent unauthorized access. When it comes to data encryption, data can be encrypted at different levels, including the full disk level, partition level, file level, volume level, database level, or record level. After that, we're going to dive into the world of secure baselines. A secure baseline is a predefined, standardized configuration and its associated settings for computer systems, applications, or networks that establishes a secure starting point to minimize security risks and vulnerabilities. Finally, we'll take a short quiz to see what you learned during this section of the course and review each of those quiz questions fully to ensure that you can explain each answer and why it was right. So let's go ahead and get started in the world of hardening and how to better protect our systems in this section of the course. In this lesson, we're going to discuss changing default configurations. Now, whenever you install a new piece of hardware or software, there are certain default configurations that they're going to utilize. These defaults or factory settings are usually not configured with security in mind, but instead, they're configured to allow a new user to more quickly install and use the new piece of hardware or software. Unfortunately, if you leave these default configurations in factory settings, this is going to pose a big security risk for your systems that a malicious threat actor can exploit. So let's take a look at some of these default configurations that we should consider modifying, including default passwords, unneeded ports and protocols, and closing extra open ports on your system to create a stronger security posture on your devices instead of relying on those default configuration settings. Now, first, we have default passwords. Default passwords or credentials are preset authentication details that are provided by manufacturers for initial access to a device or piece of software. For example, if you purchase a new small office, home office wireless router and access point, it's going to come pre-configured with a default password so you can access the web-based configuration dashboard. Now, commonly used default passwords for devices like these often include usernames and password combinations like admin or administrator password, or admin for the username and blank for the password. Since these default passwords are published in the manual and in the manufacturer's online knowledge base articles, it is critical that you immediately change these default credentials when you power on and begin to set up the device to prevent unauthorized access to your network. If your system supports multi-factor authentication, you should also configure that inside of your administrative web-based configuration portal so that way it remains better protected. Now, if you can only use a username and password to secure that administrative dashboard, you should select a long, strong, unique, and complex password to provide the best level of protection possible. Remember, the longer and more complex the password that's being used, the harder it's going to be for a brute force tool to crack that administrative password. Additionally, your administrative password should also be rotated about once every 90 days to ensure your devices remain protected. Since we want to use long, strong, and complex passwords though, we should also rely on a password manager to create and store all these passwords to ensure they remain secure and that we don't forget them. Second, you should disable any unneeded ports and protocols on your systems. Now, every device comes with a wide range of ports and protocols that are enabled, and many of these are not actually needed for your specific use case or your organization's operational needs. Remember, each active and open port is going to act as a potential opening for an attacker to gain access into your systems. So, you should always conduct a thorough audit of the ports and protocols being used, and you should disable any of them that you determine are unnecessary. By minimizing the number of active ports and running protocols, you'll be able to significantly reduce your attack surface and the probability of a successful attack being conducted against your organization. Also, if you see that a particular port or protocol is being used, like SMTP or HTTP, you can see that there's also a secure and encrypted version that might be available too. And in those cases, you should shift your services from the insecure version to the encrypted and more secure version. So for example, instead of using HTTP over port 80, you should use HTTPS over port 443 instead. Or instead of using SMTP to send your emails over port 25, you can use SMTPS over port 587 or port 465 instead. Third, you should check for any open ports on your devices. Now, many of our devices are going to have ports open by default, and these are ports that we might not ever use in the real world. For example, I've run across several devices that have port 22, 23, 80, and 443 open by default when you first power on the device. Now, this is because the manufacturer wants to provide maximum compatibility, so they've opened 2 ports for each service. In the example of port 22 for SSH and port 23 for Telnet, this allows for remote access to the device. But as a security professional, we would never ever want to use Telnet because it is completely insecure and sends all of our communications in an unencrypted format. So, we should close port 23 to prevent Telnet from being used on this system. Similarly, if you only need port 443 for secure web communications, you can go ahead and close port 80 to prevent anyone from using this less secure version of the hypertext transfer protocol. So remember, whenever you install a new device or piece of software, you should take the time to change the default configurations, including the default passwords or credentials, understanding which ports and protocols are currently being used, and the closing of any excessive open ports on your device. By understanding that our devices usually come as a one-size-fits-all setup, we can now recognize that it's important to change our default configurations to meet our own unique needs and security posture. After all, the process of enhancing security doesn't necessarily demand high levels of technical expertise, and instead, simple actions like changing a password or closing a port can be our first and most formidable line of defense against a potential threat. Remember, being proactive is always better than being reactive, so you need to take these small steps to better protect your systems and the data they contain. In this lesson, we'll discuss restricting applications. Now, let me take a moment here and ask you a question. How many applications do you have installed on your computer right now? Now, I don't mean how many are you currently running like your web browser or your email client, but exactly how many exist on your computer in total. Do you have 5, 50, 500, or maybe even more? Each application that's installed on your device will take up valuable disk space, but more importantly, it's going to introduce additional code and therefore additional vulnerabilities to your system. To combat this, system administrators will attempt to practice a concept known as least functionality. Least functionality is the process of configuring a workstation or a server to provide only essential applications and services that are going to be required by that user. To create an environment of least functionality, your administrators need to restrict unneeded applications, services, ports, and protocols on that system. Now, another method of doing this is to start uninstalling any unneeded applications. After all, every application that's installed on a computer has to be managed, updated, and patched for security, and it provides yet another chance for a vulnerability to be introduced into our systems. Now, at work, most of our computers are going to be placed under a process known as configuration management to help us oversee this process. But for our personal computers at home, they become a mess with unnecessary programs being installed and accumulated over time. For example, if you go into your program area of Windows, you can open it up and see all the different programs that you have installed. You might be surprised at just how many there are on your computer. For this example, I have a computer here with 132 different programs installed that took over 400 gigabytes of disk space. Now, looking through this list, there's a lot of unnecessary programs that user could have uninstalled. As I previously mentioned, it's really important to keep all your programs and your software up to date. And sometimes, though, these new programs will also be installed and leave the old version intact. Now, for example, I used to use a software called Adobe Premiere as a video editing software. And every year they put out a new version, like Adobe Premiere 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on. And if I went from 2018 to 2019 or 2019 to 2020, after the installation was complete, we saw that both versions, the old one and the new one, were both still installed on the computer. So, to eliminate the vulnerabilities with the older version, we had to go back and manually uninstall it from our systems. Now, this may be very easy to do if you have a small network of just a few machines, but how do you do this when you're managing a huge enterprise network? For example, one network I used to manage had over 10,000 computers spread across 4 countries. It would have been nearly impossible for me to send my system administrators out to each of those computers and check which ones had programs installed and which ones didn't. In large networks like this, preventing excessive installations is going to be your best solution. In most of our corporate networks, it's going to be common for us to create a secure baseline image that we're going to use for all the workstations that are getting installed in our company from when they're first installed at your desk. Now, this image will have the operating system, the minimum applications required for that organization, and a strict configuration policy that's all set up for all of those machines. Now, these policies will have to be updated and changed over time based on our changing business requirements, and to do that, we're going to be pushing out group policies and other things across our organization using those. So now that we've discussed why we should be using a secure baseline with the minimum level of functionality for our systems, we have to figure out how are we going to stop Gary down in accounting from downloading and installing his own piece of software on our organization's computers. To do this, what we want to do is restrict which applications can be run on a given workstation. Now, let me give you an example of this. Let's say you and I wanted to go to a trendy nightclub this Friday night. We show up at the door and we're greeted by the bouncer. Now, the bouncer looks at us and he asks if we're on the list. So I give him my name. I say, hey, I'm Jason Dion. And he looks at the list and realizes I'm not on his list because I'm not that trendy. Now, this means he's not going to let me get into that club. Now, maybe you're cooler than I am and your name was on the list. And if that's the case, they're going to let you into the club. Now, if each of us was considered to be an application on a computer, this nightclub example shows you what we're talking about when we talk about a concept known as allow listing. Based on allow listing, I'm going to be denied because my name isn't on the list. With application allow listing, only applications that are on the approved list are going to be allowed to be run on that operating system, and all the other applications will get blocked from running. This is the most secure way of doing this, and this is what we want to do to prevent Gary down in accounting from installing things on our systems. Now, if you think back to your Network Plus studies, you're probably familiar with the concept of an access control list. And this is essentially an explicit allow statement in an access control list, but at an application level instead of at a network level. Now, for my next example, let's say that my friend and I are going to head to the airport. We arrive at the airport and we walk up to the ticket counter and we try to check in with the agent at the counter, so we hand her our passports and she looks at our names. After consulting her computer, she sees that my friend is apparently a bad guy because he's on the no-fly list. Now, because his name's on that list, he is denied the ability to check in and he's not able to take the flight. Now, my name, on the other hand, is not on that list, and therefore I'm allowed to go and board the airplane. This is an example of how block listing works. With application block listing, any application that's placed on the list is going to be prevented from running, while all other applications will be permitted to run. This is considered to be a less secure method than using allow listing though, because if you're an application whose name shows up on the block list, you're going to be denied, but anything else will be allowed to proceed. Now, you may be wondering, why do we have these two different types of lists? Well, using application allow listing is much more secure, as I said, because everything is denied by default, and only the things we specifically list are going to be allowed to run. Unfortunately though, this is much more difficult to set up and manage, because every time an application is updated, you're going to have to update your allow list too. After all, Microsoft Word 2016 is not the exact same code as version 2 or version 3 or the current version of Office 365. For this reason, many companies have chosen to use block list approaches instead. But there's a problem with this approach too, because everything is allowed except what you explicitly deny in that list. And so every new variation of malware or a new program that comes out is going to be allowed until you create a block list rule for it. This becomes a big challenge when you're dealing with allow listing and block listing because you have to manage that list across all the workstations in your network. Thankfully though, if you're using a Microsoft Windows domain environment, you can use your Microsoft Active Directory domain controller to be able to centrally manage all your lists and deploy them through your group policies. So remember, when it comes to restricting applications, you can do this one of two ways. You can use an allow list or a block list. If you use an allow list, everything is going to be blocked except what is on the list. If you use a block list, on the other hand, everything will be allowed except what's on that list. This is the way you have to think about these things, and which one you're going to use is going to depend on how secure you want your organization to be. For higher levels of security, you should use an allow list, but at a minimum, you should be using a block list to block any applications you know are malicious or to block any applications that you don't want running on your network. In addition to controlling the applications being installed on a workstation, administrators should ensure that only necessary services that are needed to run are allowed to run. Services are a type of application that runs in the background of the operating system, and it performs various functions like the print spooler. Any services that are unneeded should be disabled within the operating system. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to disable services in Windows and in Mac OS X. So first, we're going to go into the Windows environment. We're going to hit on the Windows key in the corner, the Start menu, and we're going to type in services.msc and hit Enter. That's going to open up the services local connection. You can see the name of the services down the left column, a description of what they do, the status if they're running or not, what the startup type is, whether it's manual, automatic, or disabled, and how it's logged in. What I'm going to look for here is the Windows Update service, which is what provides our Windows patches. If I scroll all the way down here, you'll see Windows Update, and if I double click on it, you'll see it is currently running. It is an automatic type of startup, and this is used to detect, download, and install updates for Windows and other programs. If you're in a large enterprise environment though, we don't want to download our updates directly from Windows and install it on the endpoints. Instead, we want to push it out through a patch management system. So we're going to go ahead and turn off this service. To do that, we're going to hit stop. Now when we stop, it's going to shut down that service, and it did. But it's still set to automatically start up. So if I reboot this computer, that is going to start up again. To prevent that, we can go to automatic and turn it to disabled. Go ahead and hit apply. And now we have a service that is stopped and is disabled and no longer is currently running. This means that Windows Update will not work anymore in the background because I've killed that service. This is a useful thing because if you have a piece of malware that installs itself as a service, you can go in, find it, stop it, and disable it to be able to remove it better. We can do the same thing inside the command prompt. To do that, just click on your Windows key and type command prompt or CMD. From here, you can use SC, which is to control it through the services, stop, and the name. For that program that we just stopped, it is the WUA user V, which is the name of the Windows Update program, as you can see right here. So if I go back, if I hit enter, it would stop that service. It won't do that right now because it's already stopped, but that is the command that you would use. SC stop WUAUSER V. The other way you can stop this in Windows is using the net command, and it's net stop and the name of the service that you want to stop. Again, net stop WUAUSER V, or whatever the piece of malware or other service is that you want to turn off. Next, I'm going to show you how you can do it in a Macintosh system. To do that, you can go ahead and first we're going to create something to kill. So I'm just going to create a text pad and I'm going to call it kill this process when ready. And that just gives me something that I'm going to be able to kill. Now, to find it, I'm going to go ahead and use the activity monitor, which is under your applications, then go to utilities and then activity monitor. From here, I'm going to sort by process name and find text edit. You can see all of these different services that are running in the background. Even though I only have 3 or 4 programs actually running, all of these background services are still running too. I can go ahead and find that. And if I want to get rid of it, I'll just double click on it. You can see how much memory it's using, any statistics about it, what open files and ports are currently in use. In this case, it's some hidden file that it's saving for this, as well as some configurations and logging. And if I want to get rid of this, all I have to do is hit quit. It's going to ask me if I want to quit it cleanly, like you normally would quit an application, or force quit it, which terminates it immediately. It doesn't save anything. This was a piece of malware. That's exactly what I would want to do. And I can go ahead and hit force quit, and you'll notice it went away. Next, I'm going to show you how you can do this on a Linux system. A Linux system and a Mac OS X system actually share a lot of the same commands. And in fact, this Linux command of kill and top is going to be used both in a Mac OS X, which is Unix-based, and Linux. So I'm going to go ahead and open up that text edit again, just so I have a process to kill. I'm then going to open up my command line, which in a Mac or a Linux terminal is called the terminal. I'm going to bring this over to the left side. And if I want to see what processes are currently running, I can use the command top. Top will show me what processes are currently running. Processes are also known as services. Now we have 537 different processes running, and we can go through here and find which one we want to kill. In this case, it's the text edit, and the process ID is 2513. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit out of that, and to kill it, you just type in kill and the process ID, 2513, and watch on the right side as text edit goes away. There you go. It's that simple. Anytime you have a piece of malware or a service you want to kill on a Unix or a Linux system, just type in kill PID for process ID and the number that's associated with it. In this lesson, we're going to discuss trusted operating systems. Now, a trusted operating system, or TOS, is a type of operating system that's designed to provide a secure computing environment by enforcing stringent security policies that usually rely on mandatory access controls. Now, mandatory access controls, or MAC, is going to be used to specify who or what process is permitted to access a particular resource or piece of information. Trusted operating systems are typically used in environments where the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of your data is extremely important. For example, the J-35 Strike Fighter, which is a US military aircraft, has an operating system that runs all the operations on that advanced fighter jet. The operating system that's used by the J-35 Strike Fighter is known as Integrity 178B. Now, this is a POSIX-based operating system that's designed for embedded system use, and it's been put in place into numerous aircrafts like the B-2 bomber, the F-16, the F-22, and the F-35 fighter jets, and even commercial airplanes like the Airbus A380. Now, this specific operating system is rated as EAL6, and EAL6 is the evaluation assurance level that's assigned to this operating system based on a set of predefined security standards and certifications from the Common Criteria for Information Technology Security Evaluation. Now, the standards in the Common Criteria are used to evaluate the effectiveness of the security controls that are implemented by a given operating system, and they're rated as EAL1, which is the lowest level of assurance, all the way up to EAL7, the highest level of assurance. Now, trusted operating systems will often include features like mandatory access control, security auditing, and role-based access control to meet these different EAL standards. Now, mandatory access control, or MAC, is one of the key features of a trusted operating system. In traditional discretionary access control systems, or DAC systems, users have some discretion over who can access their data. But in a MAC system, access permission is determined by the policy defined by the system administrators and enforced by the operating system itself. This ensures that even the data owner cannot change the access permissions to provide themselves with higher levels of security. Now, there is also a trusted operating system that we use a lot known as SE Linux, or Security Enhanced Linux. This is a set of controls that are installed on top of another Linux distribution like CentOS or Red Hat Linux. And when we're using SE Linux, these systems are rated as an EAL4+. Now, SE Linux is used as an implementation of MAC in the Linux kernel to ensure that applications and users only have the minimum necessary access to your resources. SE Linux uses policies to enforce security properties and can confine potentially harmful processes to limit the impact of the vulnerabilities. The Trusted Solaris operating system is yet another example of a distribution that's configured to use MAC. Trusted Solaris is designed to provide secure multi-level operations while implementing MAC, and it gives us detailed auditing of our system events as well as compartmentalization to isolate our processes and our data. Now, inside of a trusted operating system, we'll often use microkernels that are going to minimize the trusted computing base of that system. Now, the trusted computing base includes all the parts of the system that are critical to security and must be trusted to operate correctly. By minimizing the trusted computing base, though, by using this microkernel architecture, the system's attack surface is going to be reduced, and the likelihood of security vulnerabilities will also be decreased. Trusted operating systems will also exist in the realm of mobile devices. Now, operating systems like Google's Android have incorporated elements of the trusted computing model throughout the use of various security mechanisms, including application sandboxing, which restricts access to system resources and isolates applications from each other by implementing trusted security architecture tools like AppArmor to enforce mandatory access controls on your mobile devices. Now, I'm sure that trusted operating systems sound like a wonderful idea based on all the great security they can provide us, but it is important to note that designing and maintaining a trusted operating system is actually quite challenging and really expensive. So when you're deciding which type of operating system to use, you have to balance your security requirements against your usability, performance, and other functional requirements to ensure that you're balancing the convenience and security for your end users when deciding which operating system to use. Now, for example, ever since Windows 7, every version of Microsoft Windows has been tested and rated at least at an EAL4 or EAL4+ under the Common Criteria system. Additionally, every version of macOS since version 10.6 has also been rated as either EAL4 or EAL4+, and many versions of Linux are also rated as EAL4 or EAL4+ as well. Now, EAL4 means that the operating system was methodically designed, tested, and reviewed, and it really does provide us with a really good, decent level of security assurance, but it's not nearly as high as an EAL6 or EAL7. But achieving those EAL levels with a generic operating system like Windows, Mac, or Linux would be too difficult and too costly for the manufacturers to do, so these higher-level EAL systems are usually going to involve an embedded or purpose-built operating system like those used in autonomous vehicles, airplanes, and medical devices. So remember, trusted operating systems play a vital role in providing a secure computing environment in contexts where data integrity and confidentiality are crucial. By enforcing strict access control standards, conducting rigorous security evaluations, and minimizing the trusted computing base, these systems aim to mitigate and minimize potential security risks. Over time, as data security and assurance continues to gain an increasingly important role in our organizational networks, you may see more and higher levels of trusted operating systems being used by your organization. In this lesson, we're going to discuss updates and patches. Now, updates and patches are an important part of your hardening efforts. After all, one of the best ways to increase the security of our workstations and servers is to ensure that we have a good patch management program in place. When a software developer discovers a bug or error in their code, they're going to develop a code fix for it and then release a software patch. These are designed to plug any security holes in a piece of software, such as operating systems, applications, cloud instances, or even our firmware. Now, a formal patch management system should be used inside of our organizations, and this system is going to ensure that we have a routine method for scanning our network for vulnerabilities, ensuring that our systems are updated with the proper software patches to prevent these vulnerabilities from getting exploited. Patch management can be a manual process, an automated process, or a combination of both of these. It is quite rare that anyone conducts their patch management program fully manually these days, though, because the amount of workload involved would just be way too much. For the most part, we're going to use patch management software tools to automate the checking of our endpoints to see if they need that given patch. Then, we can automatically deploy it to those machines when they need it. Some administrators will also manually implement patches on sensitive high-value systems, but for the most part, we try to automate as much of the patch deployment as possible for our general information technology and client systems. When a software manufacturer like Microsoft releases a patch, though, hackers are going to often try to reverse engineer these patches to discover the vulnerability that Microsoft was trying to protect against. This can happen very quickly and often in just a few days after a patch is released. This reverse engineering develops a usable exploit for attackers that they can then use to try to break into your networks. For example, many data breaches in the headlines are simply the result of missing a software patch. If the system had the proper hotfixes, updates, or service packs installed, then a hacker would simply not be able to exploit them so easily. Now, a hotfix is a software patch that involves a security issue that should be applied immediately after being tested in your lab environment because the vulnerability could be exploited by an attacker. An update is going to provide the system with some kind of additional functionality, but it doesn't usually provide any kind of patching of security-related issues. In fact, updates, because they provide new functions and features, can often introduce new security vulnerabilities that are going to require another hotfix to be implemented. When a significant number of these security patches and hotfixes have been released, as is the case with the Microsoft Windows operating system, they'll actually bundle them all together into a single installer known as a service pack. This includes all the hotfixes and updates since the release of that operating system. For example, Windows XP, which was released back in 2001, have been updated many times over its long 13-year lifecycle, and the final release was Windows XP Service Pack 3 that contained thousands of updates and hotfixes over the original Windows XP operating system. So, what constitutes an effective patch management program? Well, first, you need to make sure you have an individual or specific team that's responsible for tracking all of the vendor-supplied security patch bulletins and releases when they come out. Second, you need to have a mechanism in place to patch your operating systems and all your applications on all of your systems. If possible, this should be an automated process as well because it will make sure that things are being done properly even if people are off work that day because it's a weekend or a holiday. Third, you should ensure you account for your cloud-based resources as part of your patch management as well. And fourth, you should review and triage all your patches as urgent, important, and non-critical. That way, you can prioritize your patching efforts and dedicate the proper amount of resources to it. Fifth, you should have a lab or test environment in which you're going to test all your urgent and important patches to make sure the functionality is right prior to deploying them to your production environment. Sixth, you should maintain detailed logs of your patching activity so that you can evaluate and monitor your patch management program and its deployments. Seventh, you should have a mechanism to evaluate, test, and deploy firmware updates. Eighth, you should have a technical process in place to push urgent patches and hotfixes into the production environment if they've been approved by an emergency change advisory board. And finally, ninth, you should conduct an evaluation of non-critical patches for a combined rollout periodically. For example, every 2 weeks, you might be scheduled to deploy all your non-critical patches, and this way you can do them all at once in one big push. So remember, updates and patches are crucial to the security of your devices, and you need to have a patch management program in place to make sure you can minimize the risk of attack. When it comes to updates and patches, remember there are three main types that we have to consider. These are hotfixes, updates, and service packs. A hotfix is a security patch that solves a security issue and should be applied immediately after being tested in your lab environment to make sure that vulnerability cannot be exploited by attackers. An update, on the other hand, is going to provide your system with additional functionality, but it doesn't usually give you any patching of security-related issues. And a service pack is going to be a collection of hundreds or thousands of hotfixes and updates into one installer file, so that when you install a new operating system, you can install all the security patches by using one installer file instead of having to go out and collect 100 or 1,000 different hotfixes and security updates to be able to implement them on your system. In this lesson, we're going to discuss patch management. So what exactly is patch management? Well, patch management is the planning, testing, implementing, and auditing of software patches. Patch management is critical for providing security, increasing uptime, ensuring compliance, and improving features in your network devices, servers, and clients. Patch management increases the security of your network by fixing known vulnerabilities in your network devices, servers, and clients. And in terms of servers and clients, patch management is going to be conducted by installing software or operating system patches in order to fix bugs in the system software. Now, patch management can also increase the uptime of your systems by ensuring that your devices and software remain up to date and don't suffer from resource exhaustion or crashes due to vulnerabilities inside of their code. Patch management is also used to support your compliance efforts. Now, one of the biggest things that's looked at from a compliance standpoint is how well your patch management program is being run and how effectively your systems are being protected against known vulnerabilities like those CVEs that have patches associated with them. Patch management is also going to be used to provide improvements and upgrades to your existing feature set. While many patches will only fix existing problems or bugs, there's also other types of patches out there that include feature or functionality updates. By ensuring that you're running the latest version of the software and that it is fully up to date and patched, you can ensure that you have the best feature set available with the highest levels of security. Now, as you can probably imagine, there are a lot of different patches out there because each manufacturer is going to create their own patches for their applications and software. Part of our job as cybersecurity professionals is to be able to keep track of all the various updates and ensure they're all being installed properly throughout our network to all of our different endpoints to fully harden our network devices, servers, and clients. Now, that's a pretty big job, and patch management is not just concerned with ensuring that a patch is installed, but also that it doesn't create new problems for us once we install that patch. After all, patches can also have bugs in them, just like any other piece of software can. Therefore, to effectively conduct patch management, you really should follow a basic 4-step process of planning, testing, implementing, and auditing. Now, step 1 is planning. Planning consists of creating policies, procedures, and systems to track the available patches and updates, and then having a method in place to verify that they're compatible with your systems. Planning is also used to determine how you're going to test and deploy each of those patches before you install them. A good patch management tool can really tell you whether or not the patches have been deployed, installed, and verified functionally on a given server or client. For example, in a large enterprise network, you might use the Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, or you might buy a third-party tool to help you conduct your patch management. Step 2, testing. Now, while we're conducting patch management, it's always going to be important to test the patches we receive from the manufacturer prior to automating its deployment throughout your entire network. As I said before, while a patch is designed to solve one problem, it can often insert new code that creates new problems for you if you're not careful. Within your organization, you should have a small test network, lab, or at the very least, a single workstation that you can use for testing a new patch before you deploy it across your entire network environment. After all, many of our organizations have unique configurations within our networks, and that can actually break some of the security patches when you try to install them. So, while manufacturers are attempting to ensure patches are not going to cause harm to our systems, this simply cannot be guaranteed because every network has its own individual configurations. So instead, it's much better to find out that the patch is causing issues in your lab environment before you start pushing it out across 10,000 workstations and then have all your end users yelling and screaming at you because their systems are crashing and they can't get their work done. Step 3 is implementation. Now, after we test the patch, it's going to be time for us to deploy it to all of our workstations and servers that need that patch. You can do this manually by going to each system and installing it, or you can do it automatically by deploying the patch to your client's workstations and servers so that it's installed and moved into a production environment. Now, if you have a small network with only a few clients or servers like your home network, you may choose to manually install the patch across the network. But if you're working for a large company that has a really big network, you're going to want to use some sort of tool to perform your patch management. Now again, Microsoft provides a great tool known as the Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager that you can use for this purpose, or you can license a third-party patch management tool that has additional features and functions that you may be interested in. Now, some organizations do rely on automatic updates using the Windows Update system, but most large organizations won't do that, and instead they want to have complete control over the installation of patches. For large organizations, it is really highly recommended that you centrally manage your updates through an update server instead of using the Windows Update tool. By doing this, you're going to be able to test the patch prior to deploying it inside of your network environment. To disable Windows Update on your systems, you simply need to disable the Windows Update service from running automatically on the workstation whenever it's being booted up. Now, if you have a lot of mobile devices in your network, you also need to implement patching there too, and you do this through an MDM or mobile device manager. Now, even if you don't have a dedicated test network or lab environment to use during your testing phase here, you can split up your production network into smaller groups and use those as a form of test environment. For example, in one of the large organizations I led in the past, we actually used this concept of patch rings when we're deploying our new patches. Inside of patch ring 1, we only had 10 or 20 end user machines that we needed to deploy our patches to first. Then, if nothing was broken and we didn't hear about any issues, we would deploy it out to patch ring 2, which contained 50 or 100 machines. This included our system administrators and our service desk workstations too, so we could see quickly if something was going wrong. After that, we'd move into patch ring 3, which contained about 1,000 to 2,000 machines. And once that was successful, we moved into patch ring 4, which included the rest of the network, which was about 10 to 20,000 machines at the time I was working there. Now, the benefit of doing these types of deployments as we move through these various patch rings is that if there's an issue, we're only affecting a smaller group of users before we break all 10,000 or 20,000 user computers, and this saves us a lot of work at the service desk because we're not going to have to field 10,000 calls, but only have to field 5 or 10 calls. Now, step 4 is auditing. Auditing is important to ensure that you understand the client status after you conducted your patch deployment. During auditing, you're going to be able to scan the network and determine if the patch was installed properly and if there's any unexpected failures that may have occurred because of that installation. Again, using a tool like the Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager or a third-party patch management tool will be able to conduct scanning and verification of your workstations and servers for you, and this will help ensure the patches have been properly installed. Now, if you're using Linux or Mac-based systems, they also have built-in patch management systems too. For example, in Linux, you can use a package manager to deploy RPMs or packages of those patches to all of your servers and workstations, and the same concepts and principles apply like the ones we were talking about when using the Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Management tool. Now, in addition to conducting patch management across our workstations and servers, it's also important that we conduct firmware management for all of our network devices. After all, our network devices like our switches and routers are all running a form of software known as firmware on those devices to be able to provide the operating system to them. If your network devices don't contain the latest and most up-to-date firmware versions, then you could have security vulnerabilities and software bugs that could be exploited by an attacker. If you look at the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures or CVE website, you'll see a long list of vulnerabilities that are identified in various Cisco networking devices as well as other brands too. So, just like you need to patch the operating system of a Windows, Mac, or Linux computer, you still need to update the operating system of your network devices. In a Cisco device, this operating system is known as Cisco's iOS, or the Inner Network Operating System. To update the iOS version, you need to flash the firmware on that networking device. Now, some device manufacturers like Cisco do provide a centralized method of conducting firmware management in your enterprise networks. For example, Cisco uses the Cisco UCS Manager to centralize the management of resources and devices and to conduct firmware management for server network interfaces and server devices. There are also third-party tools like Device Expert by ManageEngine that allows you to upgrade, downgrade, and manage the configuration of the firmware on all of your network devices using automation, orchestration, and scripting. The bottom line here is that you need to have firmware management in place to ensure that you have the right firmware versions loaded onto your network devices in order to secure your devices, just like we do for our workstations and clients by using patch management. So remember, patch management is the planning, testing, implementing, and auditing of software patches. Patch management is critical for providing security, increasing uptime, ensuring compliance, and improving features in your network devices, servers, and clients. To conduct patch management at scale, though, you do need to use either a tool, automation, or orchestration to ensure that all your network devices, servers, laptops, and mobile devices remain up-to-date and patched against any known vulnerabilities. In this lesson, we're going to discuss group policies. Now, a group policy is a set of rules or policies that can be applied to a set of users or computer accounts within an operating system. Now, to access the group policy editor inside of Windows, you can simply go to the run prompt and enter gpedit. The local group policy editor will then launch on your system, and this can be used to create and manage policies within a Windows environment. Now, each policy is going to act as a security template that can apply a set of rules to different users. These rules can contain things like password complexity requirements, account lockout policies, software restrictions, and application restrictions. If you're using an Active Directory domain controller within Windows, you'll actually have access to a more advanced version of the group policy editor as well. Now, in a corporate environment, it is really common to create security templates with predefined rules based upon your organization's administrative policies. This security template is a group of policies that can be loaded through a single procedure within the group policy editor. A large part of hardening your operating system is going to occur through loading different group policy objectives, or GPOs, against the workstation or a given server. These group policies are also going to be used to create a secure baseline as part of your larger configuration management program. Using these policies, new accounts and computers can quickly become configured with all of your organizational requirements in a single application. After you create your secure baseline, it's also important that you conduct baselining. Now, baselining is a process of measuring changes in your network, hardware, or software environments. Effectively, baselining is going to help to establish what normal is for your organization. By knowing what normal is, you can then identify what abnormal or a deviation is going to look like. For example, if you're looking at your network utilization over a period of time, you can identify high periods and low periods. If you normally have a lot of low periods of activity during a Saturday afternoon, for example, but this Saturday afternoon you saw an excessively high amount of activity, you should be looking into that and investigating it. For example, in this image, you can see one very high traffic spike of activity. We should compare this against our known baseline and then determine if this spike is expected or if it should be investigated further. Now, every deviation should be looked at and categorized as either acceptable and expected or an issue to investigate further. Many data breaches have been discovered by investigating higher than expected network utilization during periods that should have been relatively low. By looking at these, people have found things like data exfiltration occurring or other problems that have happened on their network. So now that we've covered a little bit about group policies, let's go ahead and jump into the group policy editor inside of a Windows 10 machine so you can see what this looks like in the real world. Here we are inside of our group policy editor, and we access this by going to gpedit from the run prompt. Now from here, I want to show you a couple of things of how we can create an allow or a block list rule inside of our local Windows system, and this creates a basic group policy or GPO that we can then apply across all of our other computers later on in a domain environment. Now from here, I want to go into my computer configuration, and you'll see there's one that's called Windows Settings. Now when I go ahead and hit the down arrow here, you'll be able to see all the different options we have, including name resolution policies, scripts, deployed printers, security settings, and policy-based QoS. In our case, we want to look at our security settings. Under the security settings, you'll see things like our account policies, our local policies, and many others. For example, if I click on the account policies, you'll see things like our password policy and our account lockout policy. In our case, what I really want to focus on is our application control policies, and you'll see that here listed about halfway down. Once you click on that, you'll be able to expand it and see that we have App Locker underneath it. When you click on App Locker, this is a program that will allow you to see all of your different rules on your system. Right now, you can see that App Locker is going to provide access control for your applications, and we can create allow rules known as allow listing or deny rules known as block listing inside of App Locker. If I want to see additional information, I can hit the down arrow here, and you'll see we have different categories, including executable rules, Windows installer rules, script rules, and package application rules. In our case, we're going to work on the executable rules. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the down arrow there, and you'll be able to see that there's nothing underneath it yet, but when I click on the executable rules, we also see there's nothing here. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is we haven't created any rules yet. This is a brand new system. So if I want to create a rule, I'll simply go into the white space, right click, and then click on Create New Rule. By doing this, it will bring up a wizard that will walk us through how we can go and create these rules. So the first thing we're going to do is click on Next, and then from here, we're going to create either an allow rule or a deny rule. If it's an allow rule, it's going to be part of our allow list. If it's a deny rule, it'll be part of our deny list or our block list. In this case, I want to block any executables from running from the temporary directory. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Deny. Then we're going to select who this applies to. Is this going to apply to everyone in the system, or just our regular users, or just our administrative users? In this case, I want this to apply to everyone, so I'll leave it selected as everyone. Then we'll click on Next, and from here we're going to select what type of condition we want this rule to apply to. Do we want it to apply to a certain publisher? For example, maybe there's a publisher out there who just got hacked, and it's a big news story, and so you can no longer trust their digitally signed product because some hacker may have put something in there. In that case, you can block everything from that publisher. Or you can block it based on a path, and the path is going to say anything from this folder or file is no longer going to be able to be run because we are blocking that. Or if you know there's a malicious piece of malware out there and you know what its hash digest is, because that's being shared across the cybersecurity industry right now, we can add that hash digest in as a file hash, and anything that matches that hash digest will be blocked from running. Now in our case, I said what I wanted to create was a rule that blocked any applications from being run from the temporary directory. So that is going to be a path type rule. So we'll click on Path and then click on Next. From here, we need to browse the file or folder to select what we want to block. If there's only one file you want to block, you can click on Browse Files and select that. But in our case, I said I wanted to block everything in the temp folder, so we're going to go to Browse Folders, and then we're going to select Windows under our C drive, and then scroll down until we find the temp directory, and then we'll select that one as well. So there we go, and then we'll hit OK. So now you can see that the path is %windir %/temp/star, which means anything inside the temp directory will be blocked by this rule for everyone because that's how we've configured it. Next, we'll click on the Next button, and this brings us to our next screen, which says we can add exceptions. For example, maybe this is going to apply to every program except ones from Microsoft. So in that case, we can say add the exception for a publisher, and then we'll click the Add rule. From here, I can then browse my reference file and then select any of the publishers that I need. In our case, I don't want that to happen. I want everything to be blocked from the temp directory, so I'm going to cancel out of that. In addition to that, you can also say anything in a certain path. For example, maybe I have something under /temp/known good, and those would be allowed to be run. Or I know a certain file hash is good, and I can add that here to allow that as an exception. In our case, I don't want any exceptions. I want everything inside the temp directory to be blocked, and so I'm going to leave it like this and then click on the Next rule. Now from here, we can name this rule. By default, it's going to use the path that we just selected, but that's kind of a funny way of showing this if we're going to list a list of rules. So instead, I want to give this a new name, and I'm going to call block all files from running in temp directory, right? And then you can have anything you want in your description. For example, this rule was created by Jason to block malicious files trying to load from the temp directory. Okay, and then we'll hit create. And from here, we now have this thing saying we're ready to create this rule, and you have no default rules already in the rule list. Do you want to create them now? Yes or no? If I say no, we'll only create the one rule we have. If I say yes, it's going to create our rule plus a couple of allow rules. I'm going to allow those default rules to be created, so I'm going to say yes, and now you'll see that we have 4 different rules. Here we have the first rule is an allow rule for everybody, and it's a default rule that allows all files located in the program files directory or folder to be able to launch. We have another allow rule for everybody that allows all files inside the Windows folder to launch, and we have another allow rule that allows any administrators to launch any file on the system. Then we have our deny rule that we just created, which blocks all files from running in the temp directory. So by doing this, we've now created 3 allow rules and 1 deny rule, and from here we can modify any of those or add any other rules we need on our system. Once we've done that, we can save this as a policy and then deploy it across the entire environment, so this becomes our secure known baseline that we're going to use as we harden all of our Windows systems. In this lesson, we're going to discuss SE Linux. Now, in order to further mitigate the risk of a security breach, several Linux distributions provide an additional layer of security on top of the original operating system. Now, one of the best ways to stop a data breach is to restrict the ability of granting access or denying somebody's access to a given resource object within your file system. And this is where the idea of mandatory access control comes into play, and this is known as MAC, M-A-C. Now, mandatory access control is a system-enforced access control mechanism that's based on subject clearance and the object labels. In this lesson, we're going to discuss context-based permissions and security-related technologies as a security-enhanced Linux classified as MAC or mandatory access control systems to create those mechanisms on how to restrict access to system processes into the files, directories, networks, ports, and other things like that. Now, context-based permissions refer to permission schemes that are defined by various properties for a given file or process, and it uses those properties together rather than in isolation to determine whether to grant or deny access to a given user. Now, in Linux, there are two main context-based permission schemes that are available, namely SE Linux and AppArmor. And both of these context-based permission schemes leverage MAC to do their work. Now, this differs from the default scheme inside of Linux, which is known as DAC, or Discretionary Access Control. In DAC, each object has a list of entities that are allowed to access it, whether these are systems, processes, files, or users, and the person who controls that is actually the object owner. They can make those changes directly using things like change own or change mod, depending on whether you want to change ownership or permissions, and you can do that in a discretionary manner. Now, SE Linux, on the other hand, doesn't allow DAC, and instead it relies on MAC to do its permissions and access control. SE Linux was created by the National Security Agency known as the NSA. SE Linux is the default context-based permission scheme that's included inside of CentOS and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. By using SE Linux, we have a way to provide additional file system and network security so that unauthorized processes cannot access or tamper with our data, bypass our security mechanisms, violate our security policies, or execute untrustworthy programs. SE Linux is used to enforce MAC on processes and resources and enables information to be classified and protected based on its confidentiality and integrity requirements. This helps us mitigate the damage that could be caused by information getting into the hands of a malicious user or malicious application. Now, SE Linux defines three main contexts for each file and process. These are the user, the role, and the type. The user context defines what users can access an object. Different distributions provide different users, but the most common ones include unconfined_u, which pertains to all users, user_u, which pertains to unprivileged users, sysadmin_u, which pertains to system administrators, and root, which pertains to the root user. The role context is our second area, and this defines what roles can access a given object. Now, SE Linux users are authorized to be in a certain role, and those roles are typically used to permit or deny access to the given domain or the given resources and processes. To control this, there's a role called object_r, and this applies to your files and directories. Now, the third context we have is known as the type context. The type context is the label portion of MAC, and it's the most important context for this fine-grained access control that we want to achieve. By using this type, it's a way of us grouping objects together that have similar security requirements or characteristics. Now, another feature of SE Linux that's considered optional is a fourth context, and this is called a level. This level is used to describe the sensitivity level of a given file, directory, or process. When we use levels, we call this a multi-level security context, and it enables you to further fine-tune and constrain access even when the main three contexts are being fulfilled because this fourth one of this level may not be. Now, SE Linux also has three different modes that we need to cover. These are called disabled, enforcing, and permissive. Now, in a disabled mode, SE Linux is essentially turned off, and so MAC is not going to be implemented, and instead, we're going to rely on the default DAC method inside the file system. Now, when we're using enforcing mode, all the SE Linux security policies are being enforced. Therefore, the processes cannot violate any security policies because we have them and they're being enforced. The third one we have is known as permissive mode. Now, in permissive mode, SE Linux is enabled, but the security policies are not enforced, and this means that processes can bypass the security policies. Now, SE Linux policy is going to be used to describe the access permissions for all of your users, programs, processes, files, and devices that are going to be used and acted upon by the operating system. Now, SE Linux can implement two different types of policies. These are known as targeted or strict. Now, the targeted policy is the default SE Linux policy that's used in Red Hat Linux and CentOS. When we're using targeted policies, processes that are targeted are going to run in a confined domain, and the processes that are not targeted will run in an unconfined domain. A strict policy is really the opposite of a targeted policy, and this means that every subject and object in that system is enforced to operate on the MAC method. So when you think about targeted, this only applies to certain things on your operating system that you really want higher levels of protection for. If you go ahead and use the strict policy, it's going to enforce MAC on everything on your system. This is really complicated to set up if you want to use this strict policy because you have to go and look at everything on the system and what could be broken by not having the proper access rights. Now, once SE Linux is enforced on a system, there's going to be violation messages that are going to be captured as part of an audit log for you to be able to see what things people are doing that aren't inside of your policies that you're not allowing. Now, these violations can occur because somebody's trying to access an object or a file they don't have access to, or there's an action that goes against an existing policy and it's being blocked. When a system is first put under SE Linux, it's possible to get a lot of false violations because your policies have to be tweaked and configured and fine-tuned. Remember, SE Linux is only as strong as the restricted profiles that you're creating. So if you create good restricted profiles and you harden your applications, this can prevent a lot of malicious attacks against your enterprise networks. In this lesson, we're going to discuss data encryption levels. Data encryption is the process of converting data into a secret code to prevent unauthorized access. By doing so, data encryption ensures the confidentiality, integrity, and security of the information, even if the storage medium or communication channel is being compromised. Now, when it comes to data encryption, data can be encrypted at different levels, including full disk encryption, partition, file, volume, database, or record level encryption. Now, first, we have full disk encryption. Full disk encryption, as its name suggests, encrypts the entire hard disk drive or storage device to protect all the data being stored on it. For example, on a Windows-based system, you can use the software full disk encryption tool known as BitLocker to encrypt the entire contents of your hard disk drive or solid-state device. When you boot up your system, BitLocker will require the use of a PIN, a password, or a security key to ensure that even if your storage device is removed and accessed from another system, your data will remain securely encrypted and safe from prying eyes. If you're using a Mac OS system, on the other hand, you can use FileVault for this same purpose. Alternatively, some storage devices will also have hardware-level full disk encryption embedded into them as well. Second, we have partition encryption. Now, partition encryption is similar to full disk encryption, but it's only going to be applied to a specific partition on your storage device. For example, if you use a software tool like VeriCrypt, you can choose to encrypt only the partition containing sensitive documents while leaving all of your other partitions like the operating system partition as an unencrypted partition. Now, you may wonder why we wouldn't just encrypt the entire drive instead of only encrypting a partition. And the reason here is that encryption does add some extra overhead to the process of reading or writing data to a storage device, because now we have to decrypt the data being read or encrypt the data being written. So a lot of times, we will choose just to encrypt the portions that contain sensitive data because this will speed up our overall system. Now, third, we have volume encryption. Volume encryption is a technique that's used to encrypt the set space on the storage media to create an encrypted container that can house various files and folders. Now, VeriCrypt is a common tool for creating these kinds of encrypted volumes, and this method provides us with flexibility because we can decide the size of the encrypted volume that we want to use. This allows us to have this as a secondary form of encryption that can be used in addition to a full disk encryption system. This way, we can allow the entire disk to be encrypted using full disk encryption, and then use a secondary partition that might contain some more sensitive data that's also going to be created and encrypted using a volume encryption tool like VeriCrypt. Fourth, we have file-level encryption. File-level encryption is used to encrypt an individual file instead of an entire partition or an entire disk drive. Now, for example, let's say you're using a software tool like GNU's Privacy Guard, also known as GPG. You can do this to encrypt just the specified files you want, and now you can send those files back and forth to your coworkers over email and not worry about any attacker being able to read them because these files are fully encrypted. Now, this method is really useful if you only need to secure a few crucial files rather than your entire disk, or you want to be able to encrypt a file before you send it off of your system to some other person. Fifth, we have database encryption. With database encryption, your entire database is going to be encrypted, and this is similar to conducting a full disk encryption, but this actually can span several storage devices or a cloud-based storage environment too, because our databases are often stored across multiple data sets. For example, you might have data encryption using the SQL Server Transparent Data Encryption, or TDE. Now, this type of database encryption will automatically encrypt the entire database and requires no changes to your underlying application because all the access to the data is happening by the database system, who's taking care of the encryption and decryption tasks on your behalf. Sixth, we have record-level encryption. Now, record-level encryption is used to encrypt individual records or rows within a database. This is a more granular method, and it provides flexibility to encrypt only specific data within a database. For example, inside your customer database, you may only encrypt the columns containing sensitive information like their credit card number or their social security number inside the database instead of having to encrypt the entire database. So remember, data encryption can be applied at various levels, including full disk, partition, file, volume, database, and record-level encryption. Each of these provides a different layer and granularity of security, so it's important to understand the differences to ensure that you can select the right balance between security and system performance when you determine which encryption type you want to utilize in your organization. Data encryption does require thoughtful planning, implementation, and ongoing oversight. Our objective here is to ensure that your data remains secure and inaccessible to unauthorized entities, regardless of where that data is actually going to be stored. In this lesson, we're going to discuss secure baselines. Now, in the cybersecurity industry, a secure baseline refers to a standard set of configurations and controls that are applied to a system, network, or application to ensure a minimum level of security. Establishing a secure baseline helps organizations to maintain consistent security postures and mitigate common vulnerabilities across all of our organization's digital assets. So let's take a moment and discuss how a secure baseline is established, deployed, and maintained in our organizations. Now, the first stage is to establish a secure baseline. And a secure baseline is established by conducting a thorough assessment of your system, network, or application that needs protection in order to identify the type of data being handled, to understand the data's workflow, and to evaluate any potential vulnerabilities and threats. Best practices, industry standards, and compliance requirements, such as those outlined in frameworks like the ISO 27001 or the NIST Special Publication 800-53, are often used as our starting points for defining a secure baseline. Now, to establish a secure baseline configuration for a given type of system, like a specific laptop model that our organization uses for all of our end users, we're going to first get a copy of that brand new laptop to use as our template. Then, we're going to format it, install the operating system, update it, configure it, and properly secure it, all on that one laptop. Once this is done, this laptop will now be checked against our baseline configuration guidance and scanned for any known vulnerabilities or misconfigurations. Now, once this is completed, we now have a very secure laptop, but it doesn't have any of the different programs that our average users are going to need to perform their job. So we can now install all the applications that are needed by our employees, including things like an Office suite, endpoint detection and response agents, a web browser, and other tools like that based on their specific job roles. Once all these tools are installed and configured, we'll then scan the system again for any known vulnerabilities and remediate those too. Now, this may have taken us several hours to create this new laptop and fully secure it, so we don't want to have to do this each and every time we hire a new employee. So instead, we're going to create an image of this machine and use that as our known good and secure baseline for any new laptops that match this configuration that we need to be able to set up for our employees. This baseline will then be continually refined and secured so it remains up to date with the latest security patches, hotfixes, updates, and service packs as the threat environment continues to evolve. Now, in addition to creating the secure image for new installations, we also need to keep track of any group policies and other configurations that we're going to create and ensure they're validated and secured before we deploy them to all of our other assets. And so now that we have a secure baseline established, we can now deploy it across all of our organization's digital assets. Deployment can involve configuring firewalls, setting up user permissions, implementing encryption protocols, and ensuring that antivirus and anti-malware solutions are properly installed and updated. Automated tools and scripts can be employed to ensure that the secure baseline is going to be uniformly applied across all your devices and systems that are not installed using the disk image that we created back in the first step. So instead, we're going to be able to compare these assets against our known good configurations and ensure they all receive the proper configurations needed to make sure they're secure and up to date with all the latest configurations we've created. For example, in a Windows domain environment, administrators can use group policy objects known as GPOs to apply a secure baseline that dictates different policies, like password policies, user rights assignments, and audit settings across all the computers in a given domain. Similarly, if you're working in a cloud-based environment like AWS, organizations can utilize services like AWS Config to define and deploy secure configurations across all of their cloud-based resources. Next, we need to maintain the secure baseline on all of our assets. Now, this is done by locking down our systems so that our users can't install additional software or modify our existing configurations. Additionally, we're going to find that maintaining a secure baseline becomes an ongoing process. We're going to conduct regular audits and monitoring, and this is going to ensure that the baseline remains effective and up to date with the latest threats and vulnerabilities that we're seeing out in the marketplace. This type of continuous monitoring can be done by tools that will help us to identify deviations from the baseline and then trigger alerts for immediate remediation by our Security Operations Center team. Over time, you're going to need to periodically review and update your secure baseline to align with changes in the organizational infrastructure, business needs, and evolving threat landscapes too. Now, to aid in maintaining your secure baseline, you should also conduct training and awareness with all of your employees to ensure they understand the importance of adhering to the secure baseline configurations. Employees should be made aware of the potential risk of deviating from the baseline, and they should be encouraged to report any suspicious activities that they may notice when they're utilizing their systems. So remember, the establishment, deployment, and maintenance of a secure baseline is a critical practice within the cybersecurity industry that protects your organization's networks. Secure baselines help to ensure that an organization's digital assets are consistently configured to resist attacks and to mitigate known vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. By continuously monitoring and updating our secure baselines, our organizations can enhance their security posture and protect their valuable data and resources from potential data breaches.